and welcome to Durham Needs to Know. It's a civics and community engagement program for Durham, Connecticut. I'm your host, Karen Cheney, and our guest today is Patrick Holden. He's a candidate for the Board of Education for the November 7th election. Mariah Roy is also a candidate, but she's out of town and couldn't join us today after all. So welcome to the show, Patrick. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Thank you. First, can you tell our audience some about your background?
Yeah, happily. So, I am a former student from RSD 13. I graduated Cog and Chog in 2016. I was talking to a few students a few days ago, and it was very funny hearing from them. They thought that was a long time ago now, versus everyone else had talked to going, oh, that wasn't that long.
Well, it's pre-COVID.
Exactly,
Yes.
yeah, there's a whole different thing
Yes.
there. But so after I graduated, I went to school at Keene State College in New Hampshire. I went there until I graduated in 2020 during the pandemic.
Oh.
And then I came back to Durham and got involved with some organizations in town and did a year at a master's program, but have kind of been floating around here since.
Well, I know you from the EDI committee.
Yes.
The Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Committee. And, but also, I hadn't realized you were chairman of the Racial Justice, what is it called?
Yes, the Middlefield Durham Racial Justice Team. I was the chair of that for a year.
Okay. Yes. What did you learn working on the EDI committee?
I learned a lot. some of it was,
complicated.
yes, very complicated. Well, it was really good experience dipping into some of that local government side of things. It was very much it was a volunteer position that I was nominated for. I didn't have to go any of the election stuff with it.
Yes.
So I got kind of a first window peek into all of that through it. The issue was that it was unfortunately a very contentious board. There were a lot of just issues in it.
One board member told me that she was on the board because she was worried about equity for whites and that this was all just for blacks and minorities. And I was looking at her going, you're missing the whole point of the committee. Can you tell me what you thought was the point of the committee?
So we had a few conversations about that, and it was all about, I mean, it's in the name, it's about equity, diversity, and inclusion. To me, the equity was the part that was most confused, because there is a difference between equity and equality.
Yes.
I did hear different perspectives, and I heard this even outside of the town as well, talking about, oh, well, things aren't equal. We're not talking about, for example, issues with discrimination that white people might be facing, which, of course, discrimination in any regard needs to be addressed. The issue that I understood was equity, which is the example I like to use is three people looking over a fence, and there are people of different sizes. There's someone like me who is 6'2" and is very tall and can see easily over the fence, and then there are two people who may be 5'8" and 5'3". They're not able to see over the fence as well. Equality would be giving everybody the same stool to see over the fence. That doesn't necessarily help everyone because certain people can already see over it. Equity is giving the people who are shorter than 6'2" stools that are the correct measurement to get them to see over the fence at the same level that I am.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the EDI committee, my understanding based on our charter was okay, let's talk about the issues and let's talk about the groups that are having the most issues and misrepresentation, and let's bring them up to the level of those who are not facing that amount of those issues.
As a parent of a bullied student at Region 13, I can tell you from personal experience that equity and inclusivity is not just for racial, it's for people of different interests and different backgrounds and different neurotypical or neuroatypical situations. And so I thought by reducing the whole discussion to whether or not you're gay and whether or not whites were being discriminated against just destroyed the whole committee.
Yeah.
It led to a useless effort kind of thing.
Yeah.
What made you decide to run for the Board of Ed?
So being involved in those things kind of off the bat when I first joined, I became aware of a lot of issues in the town that maybe I had kind of been passively aware of, and a lot of attitudes that were not, I thought, representative of the community that I grew up in, that raised me, and that I wanted to continue being a part of. I really, really benefited from my time in Coginchaug. I thought overall it was a great experience for myself. I learned a lot, and I wanted to see that representative for even more people, because I also know a lot of people who did not have that good of a time, who faced a lot of struggles. So in a lot of the struggles, even a few years after I had graduated, they had not been dealt with when I was there. They were not being dealt with at the time. So I decided to run because I saw a lot of these issues just still prevalent, and combined with a far more hostile and toxic town community attitude, I felt that I couldn't, in good conscience, kind of stay on the sidelines. I needed to get involved.
So I know that the Student Wellness Committee there's a question whether it got disbanded or just, it doesn't meet anymore. Can you tell me about what you would do for the student, there's post-COVID, and you can see all these problems in, is it Killingworth and other places where this is a big issue about the mental health of our students today?
Yes, I think that I'm also not aware of whether it has been actively disbanded or if they're just not meeting. Regardless, it needs to come back. I think my, attitude toward it would be, we bring it back, we get a mix of board members and then community members as well, and then some students. I know that used to be a big part of it. It was one of the few opportunities for students to speak with administrators and kind of show their perspective, which is another reason I'm running, because I'm the youngest person on the ticket and I'm the closest to graduating, and that perspective is missing. I think that being able to have those conversations, they're not fun, but when it comes to dealing with post-COVID issues that, when I talked to a few high school students, they said was still very prevalent. They're still, trying to get back to normal. That, and then other wellness issues of mental health, of bullying. I think one of the reasons they haven't been addressed is because there hasn't been anything fixed. It's because we just haven't talked about it. We haven't been given the platform to speak and disagree and butt heads, but then ultimately come together, because the goal is to make the best environment for our kids as possible. And people need to realize that in order to get there, you can't avoid the conflict. You have to respectfully address it, but address it nonetheless, and then we can come to a consensus.
One of the things that one of my personal issues, I have a father-in-law who was a world famous infectious diseases expert. He helped write the books on vaccines and the pediatric red book, stuff like that. So he knows the stories of measles and AIDS and everything. And I have heard candidates for the Board of Ed talk about how they don't believe in vaccines, and not just the COVID vaccine, but vaccines for measles. And I just want to ask you what your policy is for vaccinations, because to me, this is, it's not just killing them, it's killing everybody else too.
And that was the thing during the pandemic. My perspective on it was that, obviously everybody is entitled to their own beliefs, until those opinions and those beliefs start harming everyone else. That is something I believe in wholeheartedly with a bunch of different things. People are entitled to what they want, but when it's actively hurting someone, then and excuses go out the door.
I am one of those people who are in favor of limited time to speak at Board of Ed elections because some people have said, oh, I have a First Amendment right to speak, and they speak for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is 10:30 at night now. I want to go to bed. And by your speaking, you're denying me my 5-minute right. And so I at least am one person that says, yes, there are many ways to communicate with your people, but one of them is not to stand up and give a 30-minute talk on your opinions. You know, that is not the best way to communicate with the Board of Ed.
And that's why,
it's not fair to all the rest of us.
Right, and that's why I think with any of those public comments, it's good to, for the public at least, to have a time limit. And maybe on the board as well, there should be a more structured, I guess, system for because I've also, people will talk and then other members of the board will not be able to have their voice. They're not able to speak up. I've seen many instances of other people having to go, okay, wait, settle down. This person still hasn't gotten a chance. And that's a whole opinion, a whole perspective that is swept under the rug that way.
This is one of my main concerns about the chairmanship at the Board of Ed. One of the benefits of electing experienced people is you know how to run a meeting. You know that there's a process to do it. You know that there's legal obligations. You produce an agenda in time for the public to know and decide whether or not they want to go. You don't call a special meeting illegally and have parents take off time from work and show up at the special meeting only to have it canceled because it's illegal. You know, it wasn't. And you know, people don't realize the importance of a good chairman, knowing the rules, knowing the regulations, giving everybody equal right to speak. I'm willing to say, yeah, you can have 5 minutes, and you can come back and counter or add to it, but you can't just sit and do a monologue, is my opinion. And that's where the chairman controls things. You know, it's a waste of everybody's time and effort to let things go unchecked, kind of thing. I have heard other candidates talk about parents' rights. And this comes under the conversation we were having before, but when I hear them talk, only certain parents have rights, not the parents who disagree with them. And how do you anticipate some of the current concerns raised by these Mothers for Liberty? Moms for Liberty, whatever they're called.
So I think that's something that I've been following for a few years now because I do have family and friends that are in education. And that has been something they have been watching very closely. Is groups like that, as you said, it's supposed to be about parents' rights, but only when those opinions of those parents co-align with this overall group. It's supposed to be about for our students, for our children, but only what we want them to be. And that entire attitude, I think, is very counterproductive to what they are claiming to support. If we really want to talk about parents' rights, if we really want to talk about what is in the best interest of our students, our children, we need to listen to all perspectives, take everything in, and ultimately, when it comes to the students, what is best for them. People often try to, I've seen this on this board, conversations have happened about, okay, well, my child isn't comfortable with this, so we should change something that has been established for a while and change it for everybody just because a small group of people are uncomfortable by it. And I think that is detrimental to children.
It's both pro and con, because if it's offensive, well, you know, my child doesn't like being called XYZ, well, maybe we shouldn't call them XYZ. 'Cause
Right.
I feel like with bullying, I would go in and I'd say, look, I want this to stop. And yes, only 3 people are affected, but boy, are they affected.
And that's where the difference is when it comes to what the outrage is about.
Yeah.
When it's something like that, when there is a behavior that is harming a child, then that behavior needs to be cut off for everybody. Whatever thing had allowed that needs to be stopped. When it's just my child doesn't like music, that's when, I'm far less sympathetic to that attitude, because there are people who do like music. If it's something like bullying, then cut that off,
Yeah.
because no one should be bullied. But when it's just someone uncomfortable with a certain curriculum, then we have to, we should explore that a little more.
I've talked about bullying, especially in a small town like Durham, because it's bad for the bully. It's easy to be a bully in a small white rural town, but when you go out into the main community and you've developed ways and habits and all of a sudden you're shot down, it's not good for the bully either. It's not good for anybody. And so my philosophy is just this. But anyway, I want to go back. You mentioned music.
Yes.
And there's talk about cutting the music curriculum, and all of us old timers are what? You can't do that because we're so famous for our music.
Yeah.
So what do you anticipate?
So, as someone who was molded by the music department at District 13, I was involved in show choir, band, all the musicals. That was my bread and butter. I loved that stuff. Obviously, there are people who are not going to be into that. There are also people who are not in the sports, that are not in the gym. But I have not seen any cuts made to any of the sports programs, which I don't think there should be. Just because I wasn't involved in sports doesn't mean that I advocate for getting rid of it. And that attitude seems to be lost. I've noticed this from the time that I was a student. That attitude seems to be lost in other areas where people say to cut things through the music department because that's an easy target. I'm fully against that. If I were on the board, I would be an advocate for the department. I would be an advocate for the music staff and for any of the students that are involved in that, because taking that away, it's already a contentious issue. It's already a contentious department, which I don't understand in the first place of why there are people opposed to it. But I think there needs to be a lot more support for it. Not saying that we need to start cutting from sports in order to support it. I think we should advocate and compensate for both. And that is a worthwhile expenditure.
That's the question, is selling it to the town. It's always the question. What do you consider, how do you intend to handle the situation on the rearrangement of classes every 2 years?
Now, the whole school reconfiguration thing, that's been an issue since, again, I was a student and we're still here. From my perspective, I went to Lyman. Obviously, I have a very strong attachment to that. I think we need to all come together and kind of get out of our comfort zone a little bit. This issue is very contentious and divisive because people are very proud of where we all come from.
I'm sorry, I call it the magic bricks.
Yeah.
It's the education, not the physical building. And Durham passed the referendum to close Lyman, and Middlefield didn't, and it's a joint board, and so therefore it wasn't closed. But the amount of money we spend to keep Lyman open, there's nothing magical about Lyman, and we could have sold it and used that money to do better programs. You know, I feel like my kids went to Lyman too, you know, kind of. You know, you can do both. Over the years, the two programs have kind of come together. There just aren't enough kids anymore. And every 2 years just seems to me a difficult thing to do.
And you took the words out of my mouth. I think that we already have moved away from the hot school ID program. That was what I was most passionate about. We can, as you said, we can bring the magic into a new environment, bring everybody into it, combine both the best of the ID program and the contemporary program so that everybody gets the same best of experience.
Everybody does learn different. I don't
Yeah.
mind.
Oh,
A lot of people came to Durham because they could put their kid in the program that worked best. But we can still have that without having two different buildings.
Exactly. I fully agree. And that's where we can get to that if we decide on a long-term goal, which we haven't actually figured out yet. We figured out the interim before we actually knew what we were aiming for.
Yeah.
And it seems that a majority of the board has the idea of a K through 5. That seems to be the most popular option. But if that's where we're going, we have to make that decision and not kind of leave it, because that's how we've ended up in this situation already, is we made plans before they were actually set in stone we could do them.
Yes.
So we can't make that same mistake again.
One of the things I missed so much when Bob was the chairman of the Board of Ed is that he sent out these newsletters to the whole community to let us know what Region 13 was doing. And I missed that communication because I don't have kids in the school system anymore, and I don't feel like I know anything that's happened until it's after already happened.
Right.
And can you talk about how you will reintroduce transparency into the Board of Ed?
Yeah, so I am fully on the same page as you I missed that newsletter because it was fun just as a former student to know what was happening.
Yes.
I think we need to bring that back. There needs to be that constant line of communication, because right now, like, yeah, you can go to the meetings or watch the meetings or read the minutes, but a lot of people just don't have that time.
Yes.
We need to get back to communication that is more straightforward and concise and convenient.
And also, not always after the fact.
Right, exactly.
I don't want to have to go and read the agenda of the Board of Ed meeting every 2 weeks so I'll know whether or not I should go to the meeting. It is very burdensome on me. Because I also want to know what's going on in the Board of Selectmen. I also want to know what's happening with P&Z. What do you want me to do as a responsible, involved, interested citizen?
And that's been part of the issue with this grade reconfiguration, is that it was a rush. Not only was it a rush process, but it was not a communicated process.
Right.
We had a lot of people I saw online and in different parent groups, and just speaking with them, we didn't know this was happening. And that's why there was such a push against it, is because it was just kind of, they felt at the very least it was kind of snuck around them because it was not communicated. So if we have something like the newsletter, or like maybe a quarterly meet the candidate, not meet the candidates, but meet the
Board of
members.
Ed. There's a quarterly in the town of Durham. There's a boards and commissions meeting, and so you can go every 3 months and find out what's happening in all the different boards and commissions in town, and they kind of report in what's going on. And I think just having a board and commission, kind of equivalent where the subcommittees can talk about what they're looking at, not just the
having it specific for Board of Selectmen or Board of Ed, just so that because having everybody together, that's great, but that's less efficient for those specific issues.
Yes. One of the things I want to talk about is how sad I am that the Board of Ed has become partisan. Before, the Board of Ed was held in May, and you were not nominated by a party. You were nominated from the floor. You could nominate yourself, and people did, as long as you got a second. You were voted. We had a chance to ask the candidates directly in front of us. We could hear their answers to our questions, and we knew who we were voting for. And when they voted on the charter change to move it to November, what happened is everybody just started voting according to party and not according to the candidate, and they didn't know anything about the candidate. And I very much miss that nonpartisan aspect. Are you going to have any difficulty dealing with I guess, how do you anticipate dealing with this situation?
It's difficult, especially in the election right now. I think there's been a lot of misrepresentation from people online, especially, about our attitude toward that. Me personally, I have no interest in partisan politics. I've talked to other people on the board currently about this, regardless of party. I've talked to Republicans about it as a Democrat. That I think it is, as you said, it's not productive for this board. I think that
the problems are not partisan problems.
Exactly.
They're communities, Middlefield as well as Durham.
Yeah, I don't we can have conversations, these individuals, about partisan issues outside of the board, but that I don't take any of that into account when on the board itself. Me personally, I used to be a Republican. When I first registered to vote, I registered as a Republican. I voted in the 2016 primary for John Kasich. I then ended up switching to unaffiliated when I was at school. And then I eventually switched to Democrats so that I would be able to vote in primaries here. My national, I guess, political ideology has shifted to represent that, but I still consider myself a moderate. I still consider myself having many roots in the party that is not what I currently am now. The letter next to your name does not indicate who you are, especially for this board.
Yes, especially
and we need to have those conversations that reflect that.
I am so grateful that you joined us today, that you agreed to run for Board of Ed. I think our town will welcome your energy and your enthusiasm and the perspective your youth gives, and I'm so glad somebody talked you into running. Thank you. And thank you so much for enjoying us.
Thank you so much. It's great having me here. No, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see you at the polls, and have a good day. Bye-bye.